So, recently Murata and One have both made the decision to retcon the past 7 chapters in the One Punch manga, so from chapter 195 to 202, covering the majority of the Ninja Village arc. The entire reason for doing this wasn't made clear, just that both One and Murata felt it was necessary to do so and hope that the people will enjoy the revisions. One Punch Man has had a long history of rewrites where every now and then One and Murata would go back to an older chapter and change what happened in it, either by adding extra pages or by completely reworking the story. Notable examples include extending the fight between Child Emperor and Phoenix Man and retconning Saitama's fight with Garou so the manga could explore a more cosmic aspect. Sometimes it's done to improve on a fight that was originally lacking in quality, and other times it makes a fight line up better with the world building of the webcomic. Whatever the case, if a chapter becomes the subject of a rewrite, then the rewritten chapter should be seen as the definitive and canon version. But before we get into the new redraws, I have to say I am kind of glad that they're doing this, since the content in those past 7 chapters were not only short in nature, being 10 to 15 chapters long, but also had subpar dialogue and action scenes, which just didn't live up to the hype that the Ninja Village arc had in the webcomic. Now, with that out of the way, in today's video we are focusing on the changes in chapter 195 and 196. Some of the chapters aren't completely rewritten, with certain panels and scenes that include similar or the same content as the previous ones, so I will briefly go over very similar ones. Chapter 195 starts off relatively the same, with Sonic taking shelter in his abandoned building after getting bumped in the head by Saitama. He's met by Flame and Wind, who are then subsequently met by the Teninsu group, and it plays out the same, introducing that man as a villain and labeling their goal of taking over the world. But when we reach the Hero Association headquarters, where previously Flash and Saitama met up with Blast and they talked about reversing monstrification, this particular aspect of the chapter seems to have been changed and moved on to the next chapter. Instead, we have a discussion about Saitama's power involving Blast and Sitch, and it starts off with Flash and Saitama greeting Blast, and Saitama thanks him for helping them get out of the underground during the battle with the Monster Association. Blast reveals that Saitama's abnormal strength has caught his eye, and him meeting Blast first saves him the trouble of finding him. Flash had expected this and states that if he wants an apprentice out of him, then he's sorry, since Saitama has a prior commitment, although Saitama obviously disagrees. Sitch then confronts Saitama with a worried expression, stating that Blast has just confirmed that Saitama is the one who defeated Garou, which came as a surprise to me, since not even in the webcomic we have the top brass in the Hero Association knowing Saitama's power. And it may seem sudden to a lot of people, and at first I thought so too, but I was reminded of the time when Saitama first applied for the association and that his immense record-breaking physical exam barely got any attention. Now, I know that is specifically part of the gag, that Saitama's powers are basically meant to be unknown, and it's the side characters that take those important roles. However, looking at this through that lens, I can't help but feel that it's well deserved for Saitama. It's kind of flipping the narrative of One Punch Man on its head, so instead of Saitama knowing who to defeat and the rest of the heroes not, instead it's Saitama not knowing and the rest of the heroes do. But not only that, it also speeds up more of the world building behind the scenes, so after the manga catches up with the webcomic, we can start entering the final arcs without hurriedly trying to build up other characters' confidence in Saitama. I'm of the opinion that this decision will help things flow better down the road. But back to the chapter, Saitama argues that he's just been getting pestered by Flash about this, but doesn't remember it very well at all, which Sitch just gets so annoyed, arguing that Saitama needs to seriously retrace his memory and that it's an urgent problem. But Saitama still doesn't budge because he truly doesn't remember the fight at all, and to just leave it since the problem has been resolved. And I mean, from his perspective, he just got out of the rubble and then had his little One Thrust Man hanging out as well as Genesis Heart, and he doesn't really know anything. Sitch seethes in frustration but doesn't say anything, thinking about how it's not been resolved, and we then get a flashback where Blast is discussing Saitama defeating Garou with Sitch himself. Blast reveals that the entire Earth was in fact in danger that day, and Saitama was the one who saved the day. But this image behind Blast also reveals that his memories consist of the events that we saw before Garou turned back time. And considering Blast can transcend space and time, this basically confirms that he too remembers the true events that took place that day, including how destructive the battle between Garou and Saitama was. So the people who know about their battle has risen to now 2 people, Blast and Genos. And in that list, I'm not including people who just know a little or suspect Saitama's power, like Flash and King. Sitch jokes that even if they tried to restrain him, then Genos wouldn't be too happy about that anyway. And he then asks Blast if the crisis that was prophesied has been averted, but Blast states that it has only just begun. Because in truth, a greater threat than Garou has begun. And this is potentially referencing God now starting to enter and influence their world more now, which was hinted at in chapter 173. But with the chapter now over, I have to say it's been pretty underwhelming because there weren't a lot of changes and they were quite short. But that's okay because it's the first changes we saw and it was hard to judge as a standalone chapter. But that is why I'm also including chapter 196 in this video, which has significantly more content, so be sure to stick around to hear it. Chapter 196 is now called Threat, and it starts off with Flash changing the topic from talking about Saitama, his disciple, and asks Blast about the god he's been fighting. Blast is silent for a moment before telling Flash not to join in the fight, since someone like him would certainly die. But this offends Flash, who responds asking if Blast just thinks he's weak, and not to get a big head just because he snuck up on him that one time. Flash then states that he won't be satisfied until he gets to fight God. But Saitama asks him why, and Flash goes on to say that it's a long story, which makes Saitama immediately uninterested. Now, the next part is very similar to the previous version of the chapter, but this time it's much more simplified. There's no flashback to Flash checking that Blast had destroyed the village, or even how Minako was made. Instead, it focuses on creating tension between Blast and Flash, as they both want to take on God, but not have the other help. Then after this, we get an entirely different event take place. Flash continues with the story to Saitama's great annoyance, mentioning that he was able to connect some of his memories thanks to Wind and Flame, and the village was a training facility for the best assassins hidden away deep in the mountains surrounded by a barrier. Flash then describes him and Sonic finding a strange enshrined cube and also a recovery device which sleeping within was the founder called That Man, who looked barely human. He then starts to make the connection that that man must have been granted the power of God and then used the village in order to put kids through hellish training so that he can make a personal army for God, with the village just being a front organization. Flash then asks Blast if this is correct, but Blast is still adamant that he cannot accept his help, and then reveals for the second time that that man is Empty Void and his partner. And while everyone is surprised, Blast continues stating that Empty Void fell under the control of God during their search for the cubes, and he must take responsibility for his failure in stopping the village. Blast then explains that with the power of God, Empty Void had an advantage over him. However, Blast has given him a serious wound that would take 15 years to recover from. But Flash isn't impressed, calling out Blast for still letting him go just because he was his partner, and then reprimands his actions before stating that he'll find God on his own. Flash asks Blast to stay out of this, and they have a standoff, but Saitama jumps in asking Blast what he wants to do about his old partner, and Blast goes on to answer, but they're interrupted by a voice announcing that the experiment is ready to start. Now, this experiment is the one from the previous version of the chapters where they are trying to reverse the effect of monsterization. And in this section of the chapter, it plays out basically the same as the other version, except this time the monsterized Hamukichi is drawn all charred and dark in color. Although, like the version before, he gets back on the chair and wants to return to being human. After the experiment, Sitch notes that reversing monsterification seems to be their psychological state. Saitama then asks Blast if he wants to return his partner back into being human, but Flash is skeptical, wondering if they have any humanity left in them at all, and asks if Empty Void is the type of person that can be captured alive. But before anything else can happen, suddenly Blast senses something and immediately locks in, activating his powers while shouting "oh no." He hits his fists together, forming the infinity sign on his hands like in the Monster Association hideout. But this time, the entire Hero Association headquarters seems to be enveloped in Blast's black hole power. And we then see this absolutely incredible drawing of a view of the black hole from further away, as it seems to capture everything in the immediate area. And then it suddenly shrinks, seeming to take the entire Hero Association along with it, while a crack appears to form along the ground towards where the building used to be, and several more cracks appear, destroying the entire ruined landscape. The chunks start to separate, leaving huge ravines all shooting away from the Hero Association that now hovers in the air, protected from the earthquake. The headquarters slowly comes to the ground, landing in the pile of rubble. After settling, the group now stands on top of the building, watching the aftermath unfold and start to return to normal. They all ask what happened, and Blast reveals that this was all because of Empty Void's Dimension Blade, also mentioning that he must have recovered fully by now. Flash and Sitch both seem to be shaken up, and he asks Blast if this is one of Empty Void's techniques, to which he confirms it is. And while Flash nervously stays silent, Saitama, as calm as ever, just asks Blast, but would you lose? To which Blast responds saying, nah, I'd win. Well, actually, they don't say exactly this, but it's along those lines, so it still counts. I mean, instead, he says he'd figure it out, but it's not as impressive, although Blast does say he hasn't been playing around. Flash continues to seem horrified, while Saitama mentions something about looking like Tatsumaki's, but before it's revealed what he says, the chapter ends there. And these chapters, I believe, have a lot of potential. A lot of the elements from the previous versions have been kept, even though they've been simplified a lot. But in exchange for this simplification, they've raised the stakes and shown that Empty Void's power is not to be trifled with, which is probably better than that weird meat stuff that he drew previously. One panel I do miss is the cute little panel where Flash says that Saitama and Minako are precious samples, and you had them holding hands shouting precious in the background, which was hilarious and adorable, but doesn't seem to even be in the next chapter, so unfortunately that specific panel is now lost media. It's now coming to the end of the video, and I just wanted to say thank you so much for watching. I'm so happy you stopped by. My channel is steadily growing and I'm amazed at the support I'm getting. And I also have a Patreon now, so feel free to support me however you like. The link will be in the description, and I will shout out names at the end of each video. Thank you again, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you in the next video.